It's the Hoffman Show on the day the Commanders have a coach. On the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. I am Craig Hoffman. Welcome to the show. Anthony Haney, super producer, in the building as well. And Haney, our plan of keeping Thursday's rundown open just in case the Commanders hired a coach worked out to perfection.
Yeah, we needed it for sure.
We did, and then we filled the rundown. And
Yes.
boy, did we fill the rundown. Whether you are, like, let's say right now you just got out of work, you get in your car, you're excited to listen, and you're going to listen on your drive home. No. That's not enough today. You need to plan the next 3 hours to just be with us because we have everything, every perspective you could want. We have national perspective. We have local perspective. Shoot, we got a former Pro Bowler who played for Dan Quinn coming up on the show. Luckily for you, you can listen to us in all kinds of ways, obviously in your car or on any radio, 980 AM or 1067 HD2 FM. In the DC area. We are nationwide, always live on the free Odyssey app. And yes, we also stream live on YouTube at the Team 980. Maybe today is the day you take advantage of that. Just pull up the YouTube app on your smart TV, search the Team 980, and we should pop up right there live and ready to go. And if you got stuff to do, that's okay. We will put all of this in our podcast feed after the show. Just search the Hoffman Show podcast wherever you get your pods. That lineup looks like this. Mike Jones in 30 minutes from The Athletic. John Keim at 5 o'clock from ESPN. His colleague at ESPN. You see here on Get Up, former Washington Post writer Kimberly Martin at 5:30. And KJ Wright, former Seahawks linebacker, joins us at 6. But we'll start with our own thoughts here on the hiring of Dan Quinn. I realize that a lot of fans are upset today because Dan Quinn is not a sexy hire. He is someone who has been a head coach before. He was 43 and 42. Things trended very well. He lost his offensive coordinator, a guy who we are very familiar with and who will be coaching in the Super Bowl next week, and it went downhill and ended poorly. I get why that is very uninspiring on its surface. And I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and try to blow smoke up your butt and tell you that Dan Quinn is a home run hire and how dare could you have any doubts in the world. I sit maybe not firmly in the dead center, but I sit somewhere in the middle. This is a good hire. Dan Quinn is a good coach. And the closer you are to the NFL and the smarter you are within the NFL, the more you seem to think highly of Dan Quinn. And so I'm much more inclined, with all due respect to everyone who is a fan, who has never worked in the league, and neither have I. I've covered the league, which is some level of proximity. But I am much more inclined to listen to all of the former players, all of the current players, all of the coaches, current and former, who look at Dan Quinn and go, that's one of the best coaches in the league. There are coaches who are saying this and people around the league, executives who say this on the record. There are people that tell you off the record. People in the league think extraordinarily highly of Dan Quinn. And there's a key difference between what they say about Dan Quinn and what they said about Ron Rivera, because I can already hear you. And I've been dealing with it. I don't say dealing with it. I've seen it on social media all day. It is what it is. It's a great exchange of fans that can get their opinions off, and whether it's YouTube comments, whatever it may be, like, I understand why people look at this and go Ron Rivera 2.0. The resume has a couple of similar points, and people say a lot of the same things, right? Dan Quinn's a great dude. Dan Quinn, highly thought of. Dan Quinn this, Dan Quinn that. Where, like, isn't that the same thing people said about Rivera? But here's the thing. If you listen closely, it's not. And why it's not is a very important distinction. A lot of people said Ron Rivera is a good man. A lot of people said Ron Rivera was the right guy for the job, considering the job in Washington had a lot to do with cleaning up the culture. There were questions about Ron Rivera's football acumen. And those questions turned out to have a whole lot of legitimacy. Nobody questions Dan Quinn as a coach. People will tell you, yes, Dan Quinn is an awesome human being. And he uses those human relationships and those people skills to be a better coach. but they will also tell you he is a tremendous teacher. They will also tell you he is fantastic at holding his players accountable. Yeah, he's your friend, but he's the friend that's going to make sure you don't make bad decisions, not the friend who's going to indulge in your bad decisions with you. And that's the kind of friend that you want as a coach. Dan Quinn's a serious person. And I was talking to a media buddy of mine in Atlanta, and he told me, like, by the time things were going south in Atlanta, that, you know, there were a couple of things where he's like, I don't really love the way this is messaged or the way he handled that thing in the press. And, you know, that does give you pause. That does give you pause of like, okay, well, what's he going to do with a DC media and DC press corps that is bigger and more intense compared to Atlanta, which, you know, they cover football down there, but it's different. It's different here. It just is. This is a bigger media market and a more intense one. So he's going to have to learn to handle those things, but he's also been in the Dallas Cowboys organization the last 3 years, and that's as big of a media circus as there is in the league. So I think for Dan Quinn, as long as he does a couple of things differently than he did in Atlanta, you can take all the things that got him up 28-3 in the Super Bowl. You can't blow a 28-3 lead unless you have it, which is somewhere that most coaches haven't even been to. You can take the good things and keep them. And I do have a good idea of what some of those things are. And if I've got a good idea after a day and a half of kind of digging and reporting on this stuff, reporting's probably a little strong, fact-finding about this stuff, you damn well better think that Dan Quinn's got a pull on these things as well. I would say, obviously, he's got to be more involved on the football side and do more coaching, which, by the way, is something that Rivera wishes he had done here. Sure, but, like, again, Dan Quinn's the better coach. You know, KJ Wright is going to join, or you'll hear the interview at 6 o'clock. I talked to him a little bit earlier today. He said he would tell DQ, be a play caller. Do what DeMeco Ryans is doing in Houston. Do what, obviously, so many of these offensive coaches do, because he is special in that realm. So I'm hoping that he does that. Now, it looks like he's bringing one of his lieutenants from Dallas, so maybe they're on the same page and he doesn't necessarily have to do that. But he got involved in the defense in Atlanta day-to-day way too late. If he sees it going sideways, I would think that he jumps in a lot faster. I think, obviously, game management is something that he's going to look at. That 28-3 loss is serious. I think he will have a better succession plan for his offensive coaches. If he does say, let's say hire Clint Kubiak, the 49ers pass game coordinator, who, by the way, don't hold your breath on that, not because it's not going to happen. Don't hold your breath because you're going to die before it happens. You can't interview him until after the Super Bowl. That's how it works when a coach is in the Super Bowl. You can't actually get that done until after the fact. So if there's no OC for a week, they're probably circling someone. They've probably had some back-channel discussions, and I would imagine it's someone off of the 49ers staff, whether that is Brian Griese or Clint Kubiak or whoever it may be that they ultimately hire. And then that person can go raid the cabinets of the other teams or across the league for the position coaches and try to bring some folks from San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. By and large, though, I think the biggest difference here for Dan Quinn versus Ron Rivera is structural. And I know this is probably not what folks want to hear. They want to hear that this guy's a genius and that this guy has got everything that he did wrong in Atlanta figured out. But the reality is Dan Quinn now gets to be what he's good at. And this is why I'm hopeful for his success in Washington. I'm not guaranteeing anything. I can't do that. Nor would I be giving you any kind of honest level of confidence if I was standing on the table being like, this guy's going to win a Super Bowl. I think it's definitely possible. But at the end of the day, they hired Dan Quinn to be the football coach. In Atlanta, he had too much personnel control. Ron here had way too much control over everything. Adam Peters is in charge. And I think Adam Peters is good at his job. Dan Quinn is going to be the football coach. I think Dan Quinn is a really good football coach. And those factors, that structural setup, that set of responsibilities being in the right place can lead to the type of cohesive vision, to use the buzzword that they have been using in the building over in Ashburn, the alignment that helps teams win. That pull of the rope in the same direction for everyone is what winning organizations are made of. Yes, the smartest people doing the pulling helps a lot. But if you have smart people pulling in different directions, you're going to fail. And I think what you have here is a setup where good people, and I'm saying this both in terms of their character and their ability to do their jobs, good people are in the right positions. That in itself is a formula for success. They have to execute. They have an enormous responsibility with this number 2 pick. But the fact that you actually have a good football coach being asked to do football coach stuff is better than they've had here in a half a decade, and it's better than what Dan Quinn had in Atlanta. And it's why I think, if you ask me today, if the line of success is multiple playoff appearances and getting this thing on the right track and being competitive, I think this was a good hire that can absolutely get them there. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We're streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. We're joined by Mike Jones at the bottom of the hour, which means we're going to squeeze in your calls next. Quick reactions from you on the phones, 301-230-0980, next on the Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app, saying hey, hey, hey to you on the Ace Law listener line at 301-230-0980. If you're in a wreck, Ace Law helps you get a check. Call 8888 Ace Law. Let's get to it. Your calls quickly, because Mike Jones is going to join us coming up in less than 15 minutes from The Athletic. What did he make of the process and the result? Dan Quinn in as the head coach of the Commanders. Let's go to Mike in Southwest to get us started. Mike, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, what's up, Craig? I like shows like this, and I like you doing shows like this. I feel like it is going to be a good show, so I thank you for that. But I'm not excited or upset. I understand the Quinn and Rivera comparisons, but I can tell you right now, there will be no Salamanders talk like it was with the Commanders and Commanders and all that stuff, because one difference is Quinn actually had some success in between his tenure between Atlanta and his next head coaching job. So I do feel like that is a plus for Quinn. And I'm not going to lie, Logan Paulson, he did a good job on Take Command, give us some behind-the-scenes perspective on Quinn, and it did help favor him more. But I'm just saying, I'm not upset. I'm super cautiously optimistic, more than a DC sports fan normally would be. But I feel like at the end of the day, he'll be okay. He'll be okay.
Yeah, I appreciate the call, Mike, and thanks tremendously for the kind words about the show and what we're trying to do, having rational heads here. I will say this, that story that Logan told on Take Command about how Dan called him and called others and really tried to understand what went wrong in Atlanta, to me, says so much. Because the thing with Rivera that drove me nuts is I still don't think Ron has any idea what went wrong in Carolina and what went wrong in D.C. Like, he is bad at identifying problems, which is why he can't fix them. I think Dan Quinn has already proven, just like from a football sense, he's a better problem solver. We're going to see how he is as a head coach, but like, that's really important. Can you identify things? And hopefully he can identify them more in real time when new challenges arise moving forward. But, you know, that's the gig. You know, good coaching is being a good teacher and a good problem solver. I think that's the some of the best traits you have as a head coach. Let's mix it up a little bit, Ant. Let's go to Dion. Dion, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I just want to highlight one thing. I do listen to JP and Mitch and also Chris Russell, and I didn't quite hear them speak on the group bringing in Quinn 3 times before Ben even was available to be interviewed. So that speaks highly to me that the group bringing him in the 3rd time really liked him fitting in.
Yeah, hold on, Dion, real quick, though. I do think that was a misreport. I think what had happened was his original interview got rescheduled, and so it was his second interview was his first in person, and some people thought that was his second in person plus the Zoom interview. So I actually do think he only interviewed twice, the Zoom interview like everyone, and then the in person like most of the final candidates did. But it was very clear coming out of both of those, you heard some rumblings, which is about all you get from this group, that they really liked him a lot, that he was very near the top of their list.
Yeah, that's true, man. I heard he did good in the interview. Again, I think a lot of folks not understanding the group that has been put together. You got to excuse the little noise, man. I'm driving a tractor trailer. Long story short, you got a lot of brains that are smart in that group. Some of them sports figures, some of them not. But I can see them diligently doing what they needed to do. They had multiple coaches on that list. But I see Dan being one that fits what the GM want and what the owners want as a collective.
Yeah,
so that's my take on it, man. I like the hire, and I hope the dude do well.
I appreciate the call, Dion. Thank you. I think the other thing that I like, talk about the fit with the GM. Like, obviously, Dan worked with Kyle in Atlanta. They have a great relationship. I tend to think that is how he is going to want to model his organization. Obviously, Adam Peters comes from San Francisco, working with Kyle, but they also have, experience working with other people. But I think one of the things I like about, actually I look as a positive of him being the retread guy. Like, Dan's done it with the power, and it didn't work. Not that he had final say over everything in Atlanta, but he definitely had a big say. That's not the case here, and I don't think he's going to all of a sudden want it one day. I think Dan Quinn is going to be happy to be the football coach. And sure, maybe one day, does he want to raise, or does he want a little bit more of this or a little bit of that? And maybe he and Adam Peters at that point have a great relationship, and they go, you want to know what? We'll give you a little bit more say. Like, I'm still going to be working here, but we're gonna shift a little bit. But Dan Quinn is coming to work with Adam Peters, not with. And I think that's really important, where if you do get a young hotshot coach, does that guy get a little impatient at some point? So not that I wouldn't take a young hotshot coach who's got great passion and great vision and all the things that would make him successful. But I do think there is a very clear understanding of roles and boundaries here that is good for the organization. Well, again, they got to execute, but it is what it is. All right, Anthony, 2, 3, or 4? We got time for one more, I think. 2, 3, or 4?
I went with 3 yesterday, 2 or 4. I say 2.
All right, let's go to our guy, DH. DH, thanks for calling again. You're on the Hoffman Show again. What's up?
Hey, man, I love being here, man. I appreciate y'all having me back. Look, man, I feel like what you guys have been talking about, especially with you and Logan, about those relationships, right? And I know they talk about good coaching relationships, but good relationship with players. I don't know if we were able to see who he will be able to bring in to come help bolster this roster as well with guys that want to play for him, because the stories that Logan have shared. But I shared this coaching search. It's almost like my home search for a couple years ago, man. The house I live in now is not the house that I specifically picked first, but it was on the list. I checked it out a couple times, and then the house that I really wanted, it was gone. They offered more than what I had. So I did get this house, quote unquote, settled, but it turned out to be the best option for me and my family, man. Some of the parts felt lived in. Some of the furniture needed new furniture, needed new paint. So we'll see what comes in on the staff and kind of revamp the process. But it turned out to be the best option for me. Now, we're going to know that for a couple of seasons. But, I mean, it seems like a good, safe selection. It's not nothing too risque. It's not the sexy pick, and I think that's what fans were having an issue with. It's not sexy. It's not brand new. No, it just might just be consistent, which at this point in our fandom, as far as wins and losses, we might need some consistency where we're just in the mix every year for the playoffs, and we have a good scheme and guys want to come here. I mean, that's might just be what we need. And further, if he can help fix Emmanuel Forbes and turn him into the playmaker they're supposed to be, the same way he helped Deron Bland turn into that guy, man, I'm all for it. So, hey, let's sign me up now. It's just time to go play football, man. It's that my favorite time of the year, the off season. Let's roll this thing and let's go see what we can do.
Indeed. DH, thanks as always for the call. Another analogy that I really liked that I've kind of used is you go play pickup hoops and start picking sides, and all the young athletic guys that were dunking in warm-ups get picked, and then you start running fives, and those guys suck. And then the old guy who's got game that was picked last all of a sudden is just running things up and down the court. He's throwing full court outlet passes like that. That's what I'm hoping Dan Quinn is, and we'll see. But that's what I'm hoping.
The old
for.
guy setting picks.
Yeah,
he getting rebounds. He might have 2 points, but he gonna give you all the fouls, and he gonna make sure the team stay together. That's me now, actually. But yeah, that's perfect. That might just be what we need.
DH, I hadn't played pickup in a minute, but I'm scared that's also now me. But we'll have to figure that out another day. Appreciate the call, brother. Yeah, no, I think that's correct. And if it works, it'll be because he's got that know-how, because he knows what he's doing at this point. He knows the mistakes he made. He knows how to fix them. But I will say, some of the personnel here, the way it matches up with DQ's defense, I am very, very intrigued. Like Emmanuel Forbes, I saw he had a tweet earlier. That's an excited man. Hey, finally, someone who's going to let me go create turnovers. That not be whining about my slightly imperfect technique when I'm still playing very well in the eyes of everybody else. So there's things like that I think are very exciting. I think some of the flaws that he's had in his defenses could be fixed by some of the personnel here. We'll get into that as we go. Mike Jones set to join us next, though, from The Athletic on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on that free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 as well. And we're joined now by our good pal Mike Jones from The Athletic. Mike, fun little day we're having here, huh?
Hey, nothing.
You're echoing.
We on Thursday news dump here. It's pretty quiet. We're watching, we're waiting, and then boom, here we go. Finally got their guy.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing. So we were talking this morning when we set this up, right? And we said, at that point, I'd seen your tweet about kind of the process and where it goes. And then all of a sudden, like 30 minutes later, they announced Quinn. Like, what did you make of the process to get here? And how do you think that's impacting how people see this hire?
Well, the process itself, I think it played out kind of awkwardly, just because it was clear that they were trying to wait this thing out, because they wanted to interview Ben Johnson again. He was their favorite guy from, all accounts. But when I asked around the league, hey, were you surprised that he pulled out Washington, Seattle? And, the people around the league that I talked to said, no, I mean, he's a different kind of cat. And look, remember, He backed out of an interview request with Atlanta, with Carolina, and they knew that he had a very high asking price, and some people thought that the asking price was to some degree because he wasn't totally sure that he wanted to leave. So he almost made it, a little bit, hey, if I'm going to leave, let it be an insane amount there. And so you saw some talented guys come off of the market while they were waiting this thing out. And so, that didn't look the greatest. They will tell us that, hey, Dan Quinn was our guy from jump. We wanted a strong leader and whatever. And maybe so. But if they wanted Dan Quinn absolute the most, they could have hired him on the spot, a couple weeks ago. Now, did they just want to do their due diligence and see Ben Johnson one more time? I guess you could say that. But again, just the way that it played out, it didn't look the greatest, especially because the way they went so hard, got the number one guy on the market in the general manager search. And so this was different.
Yeah, I do. I totally agree with you. And I think that they almost had to make this hire today to save any face. Not that, look, once they take the field, how much does this stuff matter? Not really much, unless there's a reason they didn't like the guy. But it's kind of like you open it up again and try to add candidates, then you're admitting that the guys that you interviewed and were left with were not impressive enough for you to hire one of them. So the idea that they could have potentially opened it up, like Schefter was on ESPN last night going like, oh, well, they could take their time now. I'm like, not really. Because if not, or if so, your whole process that looked really smart and looked like it was well put together clearly didn't work, and that's not a great start to the Josh Harris / Adam Peters era.
No, it wasn't. And I mean, take your time. I mean, yeah. I mean, he said they could take their time. It could be tomorrow. It could be a week from now. So who knows? But I agree with you. They had to make this hire now. The only way that if they didn't is if they said, hey, we really like Steve Wilks. But the thing is, if they really liked him, they would have put in an interview request and they would have been able to interview him before now, right after conference championships. And also, Adam Peters knows Steve Wilks. So even if that was the narrative, it still would have been a little sketchy. But either way, to us, it looks odd. And I know for the fans, it isn't the most, sexy hire. I sent out a text blast to a number of talent evaluators and coaches, and everybody's got good things to say about Dan Quinn. And people are like, look, don't let the Cowboys' last game sway you on this guy. He's got the body of work. It's a smart hire. He's a strong leader. He'll connect with his players. He'll put them in position to succeed. This is a good hire. That was multiple people said that, but they also said, look, it's going to take time though. That roster is not nearly as good as what it was even last year. Ron and Marty kind of, they put them in a position, where it was hard for them to succeed. No offensive line, trading away both pass rushers, not having strong linebacking core. So those are all things they're going to have to get. And it could take a year, it could take 2 years. But they have the resources. Now we'll see how they use them.
Yeah, Mike Jones is with us from The Athletic. I struggle with this roster, not because I think it's actually great, but maybe it's better than we think, and it was so poorly coached that there are a few pieces here or there that, not that I think everyone's going to be like that, but is there one piece here, one piece there that was just so horribly misused? I look at a guy like Emmanuel Forbes who struggled. He's the kind of corner that Dan Quinn wants, that super aggressive turnover machine. So I'm curious, as you talk to talent evaluators who are taking jobs in new places, how do they go about, if you're Adam Peters or Dan Quinn coming into this job, how do you try to begin to evaluate what looks like a flaming pile of wreckage from the 2023 Commanders season?
Yeah, well, this is the problem. They don't have a lot of draft picks that have done well for them, really. You know? When you think back the last several years, they haven't. And so there are holes there. You've used, draft picks. Your best position is probably your defensive tackle position spot. Somebody said to me, but you know what? Jonathan Allen doesn't sound like he's a guy who wants to go through more rebuilding. You're going to have to wind up trading him because he's thinking about his next contract. He wants to win. He wants to get paid. Will they wind up having to trade him? When you look at the roster, there's nothing on the offensive line that's something that you can say, hey, here's a real cornerstone there. They went out and got some free agent linemen, didn't really give them a whole lot there. The linebacking core, again, edge rushers, those were areas that people mentioned to me. They also say, hey, the questions about Forbes, because he was, a supposedly, look, remember when he was drafted, we all had questions because this
Sure.
kid was, very long, which is great, but really, really light. Now, will Dan Quinn be able to find a way to put him in position to succeed and take advantage of his strengths? Maybe he'll be a better defensive mind, or whoever he brings in as his defensive backs coach can get something out of him. But, just given the track record of all the draft picks that were under Ron, it's hard to look at this whole roster and say there's a lot there. What I was told from another talent evaluator said, hey, that roster probably 2 years ago was pretty good, had some holes, but still had some pieces. Now, basically, you have Terry. You have a young quarterback, but he's kind of, shell-shocked, ruined a little bit by the way he was mismanaged. Brian Robinson, a decent running back there. But overall, there's not a real position you can point to and say, hey, we are great right here. Outside of, again, probably the wide receiver position. But a lot of holes. You've got to get an offensive line. Got to get better linebackers. Got to get edge rushers. That way you can make a little bit of
Right. The hope is that they're not as bad at scouting as it seems, and they were worse in coaching. But there's also the chance that they were actually that bad at scouting, in which case, oh, buddy, this is going to be a long rebuild. Sam Cosmi along the offensive line. But, again, it's a misuse. If the best thing you've done in the last 4 years is take a right tackle that turns into a good right guard, that wasn't a good use of a pick. You're bad at this, and that's seems to be where we've been at. You mentioned the coaches. You do such a good job of kind of covering the next crop of up-and-coming coaches. We've heard the name Clint Kubiak bandied about, a couple of others already. What are you hearing in terms of the OCs still available and who could be a good fit with Dan Quinn? Probably off that Kyle Shanahan tree, who obviously he and Dan had such great success in Atlanta, or he and Kyle had such great success in Atlanta.
Right. And I asked somebody, I said, does Kyle have any more guys that he can trade right now? Because, Raheem Morris is swiping guys right now, from Kyle, from Sean McVay, they're getting those guys. Now, Chris Morgan is a name that was mentioned to me. He was also in Atlanta there, an offensive line guy, but somebody that's also been viewed as a potential offensive coordinator in the making. I'm not saying that Dan Quinn or that he's, that he's the guy right now. But a couple years ago, somebody had said, hey, this guy's got a bright future. And I continue to hear that he's the guy that, so if you're looking at that Kyle Shanahan tree of guys, maybe that's a name. Again, we'll see. And we don't know if Dan Quinn is going to go with that same type of offense this time around. He could do something different. Pep Hamilton's a name that was told to me, hey, look, he's a very good offensive coordinator. He's had success in a lot of different stops with different styles of quarterbacks. He's a guy that, should. But again, we don't know what Dan Quinn is looking at. It seems like that Shanahan type of brand is what is really expanding and taking over the league. But again, maybe he looks for something entirely different in his second act as a head coach.
Mike Jones from The Athletic with us. Let me ask you about a name that I am stunned I have not heard more. Frank Smith is Mike McDaniel's top lieutenant in Miami on the offensive side. He was a guy I thought was going to get head coaching looks. I think Carolina had him in for an interview. I can't remember. But I'm kind of surprised that his name hasn't come up more. And I do wonder if Dan or someone else could pry him away from Mike by offering him play calling responsibilities, which obviously McDaniels is calling the plays at Miami's. What's kind of the Frank Smith story been this offseason?
Yeah, and it was interesting that he was one of the guys at the NFL Players Association, when they did their poll, they polled all the players and you were supposed to rank your coordinator. And he was one of the top 5 vote getters of all the coordinators. But what was interesting about him, that some people, when I asked, guys who were interviewing for general manager jobs, hey, did you put any stock into that survey? And a lot of them said no, because they're like, look, a lot of these offensive coordinators that they're saying here have never called plays, so they're a little bit unknowns. And Frank Smith was a guy they say, hey, yeah, he's there with Mike McDaniel, who does a great job, but he's only been there for 2 years, and we just don't know a whole lot about him at that time. Now, is it somebody that the coaching fraternity is very small. There's only 32 coaching staffs and everybody is connected in some way. Is that a way that you could get somebody? I think that by offering him play calling duties, it would be the carrot that you have to dangle to get him. But again, we don't know if that is, who Dan Quinn's looking at. But he is a guy that's well respected by his players, even though he wasn't a play caller, because of his organizational skills, the way he's able to connect with players, and his attention to detail. And also, even though Mike McDaniel was the architect and the play caller, he still has to lead the offensive meetings, Frank Smith did. And so it's not like this guy's incompetent. All these guys are calling plays in their heads, and sometimes they're having input just because they haven't been play callers, but it's just something that it kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a veteran guy or a guy that, maybe needs a little more seasoning. I think, Bobby Sloak was a guy that, had some head coaching interest, but I think a lot of people were kind of kicking the tires on him to look for the future. This is his first year as a play caller, did a great job, but not ready for a head coaching job. But, he jumped from not being a play caller in San Francisco to being a very good play caller with Houston with a rookie quarterback. So there's an example for you. If Frank Smith is a guy, he didn't call plays. Brian Callahan did not call plays in Cincinnati. Really impressed when I asked around in Tennessee. He was very prepared, had a clear vision, very detailed. His knowledge of what their roster was and how he would use them really impressed them. So just because you're not a play caller doesn't mean that you're not a potential guy. And, we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah. All right. Last thing for Mike Jones. I totally agree on that, by the way. I'm fascinated kind of that play calling thing. Like, yeah, it's really important, but there's a lot of other stuff that you can judge coaches off of. Last thing, as we close the book on the last era here, we think that Eric Bieniemy is going to be on his way out. It does seem like Quinn's probably going to go in a different direction. I mean, obviously he could surprise us all and retain EB, but what's next for him? He comes to DC to prove that he can do a job outside of Andy Reid's wingspan or outside of Andy Reid and with more responsibility. Yeah, I know there's a bunch of other factors there, but he didn't ultimately do a good job. Where does that leave him now moving forward?
It's interesting. I don't know where that leaves him. I've heard different things. I know that players here weren't really a fan. I know that he was hard on his assistants, but people on the outside felt like, hey, look, he had that kid playing very well for the first half of the season. And then when defenses got the playbook on him and knew bring pressure and everything like that, they also fell behind a lot when their defense, lost their two pass rushers and weren't able to stop anybody. And so they had to throw a whole lot. I felt like the enemy's play calling reflected basically a guy who's calling plays for a veteran quarterback, and not a guy who knew how to develop a young guy. So we'll see. I don't think that he was a bust. Was it as successful as what everybody would have hoped? No. But again, there's a lot of guys that are out there who are connected to certain guys that they've already had in mind. I haven't heard his name yet, and a lot of these offensive coordinator positions are being filled up.
Yeah, that is the weird thing. I'm just like, wait, are we going to go musical chairs and EB is going to go from a guy who came here to become a head coach to not even having an OC job? That seems weird, but it seems plausible.
Right. I mean, look, a couple years ago, Byron Leftwich turned down the Jacksonville Jaguars head coaching job because he felt like maybe he'd find a better situation the next year. The next year, the Patriots weren't very good. The Buccaneers weren't great. Tom Brady was on his way out, and then, Byron Leftwich, nobody interviewed him the next year. And then this year, nobody could even tell you where he is. I've been on a goose chase since October trying to find the dude, and nobody knows. So, you hope that EB can bounce and find a place somewhere, but you just never know.
Yeah, he would be great on TV. I'll tell you that much. His personalities. Sure. Let's get EB on a mic. Just got to remind him that probably he's going to be legislated by the FCC. Anyone that went to training camp knows that could be an issue. Mike Jones with us. See you next week in Vegas.
Yep, I'll be there.
All right, I'll see you out on Radio Row. That's Mike Jones from The Athletic. Read his work covering all the coaching searches league-wide. He's got great information, especially on that next crop of up-and-coming coaches always throughout the year. So as you kind of follow the cycle year-long, Mike's always a must-read. We get back, a few more thoughts to close out the hour, and then Mike and I's buddy John Keim joins us at 5 o'clock here on The Hoffman Show. is the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. John Keim in less than 10 minutes, ESPN Commanders reporter. Like, he needs an introduction. He's just John Keim. You know who he is. Keim with us at 5 o'clock. Let's take another call or two real quick. Let's go back to that Ace Law listener line. Where if you get in a wreck, Ace Law can help you get a check by calling 8888 Ace Law. Let's go to Darren in Austin, Texas. Darren, are we listening on the Odyssey app or watching on YouTube?
I'm listening on the Odyssey app.
Appreciate
great to
that.
talk to you, Craig.
Thanks, Darren.
Okay, so what I wanted to say was, I don't know if you remember, but in November, Josh Harris was speaking at some panel where he was talking about building an organization, and he talked about how, it's a long journey. There are no shortcuts to the top. This is exactly what he said. There's shortcuts to the middle. You want to be 8-8, I can get you there quickly. 8-8-1. You want to be great, there are no shortcuts. And what's frustrating to me about this Dan Quinn hire is I feel like there's a 90% chance he's going to be mediocre. He's not going to be terrible, but I don't think he's going to be great. And I really wish we'd taken a chance, like a swing at somebody like Bobby Slowick, if we couldn't get Ben Johnson. And I was just curious to hear your thoughts.
I think that's a totally fair call, Darren. I do think that Dan Quinn can be very successful here. And as I mentioned off the top of the show, I think the biggest difference in both what the situation was with Ron and what Dan initially had in Atlanta is this is a football coach being hired to be a football coach, not a personnel person or a manager or any of these other things. I also think even in those roles, Dan is just better at it, Quinn is, than Ron Rivera. But structurally speaking, this is a much better thing. I also am not in the interviews, so that is very hard for me to, like, I should say it's actually very easy for me to second guess because I don't have all the information. I don't have any consequences of my thoughts. I just get to spew them, and if I'm right, great. If I'm not, great. It doesn't really matter. We're never going to know. It's all hypothetical. I'm a radio host, not someone who actually hires people for NFL head coaching jobs. But I would have to imagine with that group of people in the room, if they thought Slowick was ready, they would have taken that swing. I think philosophically that's where I sit, and I'd be lying if I told you otherwise. I'd rather take the big swing on the guy who might not be quite ready, but feel like I can provide him the infrastructure to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, and I agree with you because it's not like we're going to be good the next couple of years anyway. And I would have felt so much more comfortable with somebody like Bobby Slowick working with a young quarterback and both being brought along. And you know what? If Slowick doesn't work out, we move on, and our quarterbacks.
But I see. Here's the thing I would say, Darren, and we got to let you go because Keim's coming up in a few minutes, and I don't want to be late for John or any guest. But I do. Here's the problem with that philosophy. It sounds good on paper, but if a guy's not ready and you're losing, that means you're going to develop a lot of bad habits. Guys are going to slip. You're not going to be competitive. Like, he's going to be overwhelmed, and he's also then not going to do a good job developing the quarterback. I can tell you this right now. If they're not winning, it's not going to be because Dan Quinn is overwhelmed. There might be other issues, but it's not going to be because Dan Quinn isn't there to give it his all every single day and to be highly organized and leading these guys and having people excited to go to work. They might just not be good enough because the roster's not very good, or maybe Dan screws up a hire here and that coach isn't very good. But, like, it's not going to be because the head coach is in over his head. And if Slowick isn't ready and they're not very good, then that's definitely a possibility. So if you're not going to be good, I'd rather have the veteran retread to kind of build some good habits along the way of not being very good. And in 3 years, if you're still 8-8, okay, well, then you fire Dan Quinn, and then maybe Bobby Slowick's ready then. And he's more ready, or there's another young guy that's ready to come and take this thing to the next level. But at the end of the day, because of how barren this roster is, unless you have someone that's ready to be in complete control and command, you're not actually going to get, like, they got to get to C. C is a championship. They're at, like, barely at A right now. We need someone who's capable of getting from A to B. And hopefully someone who's all the way ready to go A to C. But we thought Ron Rivera could go A to B, and he actually went, I think, from B to A. So I do think it's going to go better than that, which is nice. How did we get here? The guy who's got more information than anybody else in terms of the media side of it. No, we're not going to talk to Bob Myers, or we're not going to talk to Rick Spielman or Adam Peters next. But on the media side of it, no one's got more info than our friend John. Keim Cakes joins us next. Number 2 of the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Our next guest, well, these days, he's a YouTube star. He's also been covering the Commanders for many, many years. A number that, well, it's enough that I don't remember it. It's like 25, 27, 28. Anthony, hit the magic button, and then we'll ask John how many years it's been at this point.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
ESPN's John Keim. Cakes, if we measure it in both years and coaches, how many is this?
For the Commanders?
Yeah.
2.
Two what? In the last 5 years?
They've only been the Commanders for 2 years. I've only covered them for 2.
Why was I not prepared for a dad joke for you? Jesus Christ.
Well, but it's true. Like, I didn't start off covering the Washington Commanders. I started off covering the Redskins.
You've got 3 team names. How many coaches and how many years have you been on this silly beat?
All right. So since 94, and I think for the coaches, it's now 9. So it's Norv, Marty, Spurrier. I'm not including the interim coaches. Marty, Spurrier, Gibbs, Zorn, Shanahan,
who can forget?
Jay, Ron, and now Dan Quinn.
There we
9.
go. You're like, there's like those NBA veterans that have played for 12 teams in 13 years. Like Jamal Crawford was the classic. And like, I remember there was a sideline interview once where they asked him to name all of his coaches like at halftime, and he did it. That's you all of a sudden.
There have been a few.
There have been a few. Let's focus in on this one, though. So this process is under a lot of scrutiny right now. We can talk about that, and we can, of course, talk about the result. We can talk about Dan Quinn kind of outside of the process. But what did you make of how we landed here at Dan Quinn? Because I feel like all along, you've kind of been pumping the brakes on some narratives that seem to be spinning out of control in other places. So what's the reality of how we got here?
So, yes, I had been, and I wasn't alone. I know that, you would hear that, certainly some people in this group liked Ben Johnson or would have liked an offensive-minded coach. He was never a lock. I never thought that. And I knew that they liked Dan Quinn. I knew that going into this, there was nobody in the GM search. It was Adam Peters, period. Right. That's the guy. And you had to bump him off that. Nobody was like that entering this coach search. So as we got to this point, and like on Monday, for example, Craig, like I had been told probably end of the week hire. So it wasn't like, oh no, Ben Johnson pulled out. Now you got to spend a few days thinking about it. This was the end of the week, even before Ben Johnson, withdrew his name, even before Mike McDonald went to Seattle. It was always Thursday or Friday, right? That's what I had heard. So I don't think there was this, and I say that I heard it on Monday because that's before all this stuff happened. So it's exactly how it followed suit. I know, like I said, I know Dan Quinn fit a lot of what they were looking for. Plus, he had experience. And so I think, so that's why he was always a favored, maybe not the favorite, but a favorite candidate. And I don't know. I know the perception is it was Ben Johnson, but I don't know that they would have hired him for sure. So I can't say that he wasn't. I can't say that he was going to be hired either because we don't know that. He wasn't offered the job. And I know, like I said, I know there were people who liked him, but I know it wasn't a lock.
Then you, of course, had the McDonald news yesterday as well, which seemed to be somewhat a factor here. I don't know what your knowledge is of what kind of feelers they were putting out. Like, hey, dude, are you getting on the plane to go accept the job? Are you still interested? What happened yesterday in the reality of us landing on Quinn today?
Well, I think part of the reality with McDonald, it seemed like he and Seattle had an infatuation for each other, right? And so, I think things went pretty well here with him. I don't know. Like I said, he was not offered the job here, so I don't know that he turned him down. But certainly, he likes Seattle, and he's going to a place where you have John Schneider, who's a proven GM, and they've built really good teams out there. So I think, maybe after having been in a stable situation with front office like Baltimore, that's what you were looking for, that rather than new. I don't know. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know that he would have been the guy either. I think it's like, certainly would have given them another option. But I can't say that it was like, oh, Ben Johnson, no, okay, now you got to go to big. I don't know that it was a 1, 2, 3. Now we're on Dan Quinn. I don't know that it was that, right? So I think, but it certainly took away one really good option for them. And the thing is too, Craig, like this, all these coaches, like, first of all, there are a lot of people who didn't know who Mike McDonald or Ben Johnson were a month and a half ago, and they suddenly couldn't live without him.
Right.
I always find that funny. Like, but there's also a lot of stuff we wouldn't know about them. Ben Johnson coached in a fantastic situation in Detroit. You have a strong head coach. You had a veteran quarterback with a really good line and really good skill talent. He made it work with that offense. Like, I liked his offense a lot. I really did. And so I think he's a very good offensive mind. Not taking anything away from him, but when you become a head coach, you have to build that. And same thing with McDonald. Like, McDonald's coming, his defense, he's very creative as a defensive coordinator. Love that, right? But you have to build that. So that's where Quinn had an edge, was that the public, they have seen what he can do in that role. And, so I think that always was a help too, I believe.
John Keim, ESPN, of course, the John Keim Report podcast as well. You can subscribe to their new membership on YouTube, which is very cool. So if you're exclusive cakes material, you just go subscribe to their membership on the Empire Media page. So I guess the remaining question, that even if you're like, hey, I like Quinn, but this process is a little weird. Right. Like, we can talk about Quinn specifically. This will be my last process question, is they were still ultimately the last team to decide. Yeah. So if you're looking at it that way and say, well, even if they wound up with their number one guy, what took so long? What did they do differently, for better or for worse, that they were the last team to fill their spot, when it seemed like, especially after the way they did the GM hire, and for how desirable we thought this job was, we thought they would be one of the first?
Well, part of the problem is, look at how many candidates they had that were still alive in the playoffs.
Right.
So 4 of their final candidates, it was 2 with Baltimore, 2 with Detroit. That right there is partly why. Like, first of all, Atlanta interviewed like 30 people for their job, but not everybody was in the playoffs still. The people that they wanted were still alive in the postseason. So and you have to fulfill the Rooney Rule requirements. You have to interview 2 minorities from outside the organization in person. That wasn't going to happen until this week. So, that was part of why it took to this point for them. Now, they could have, had they wanted to just check boxes and do that, you could have gone and done that. But Aaron Glenn and Anthony Weaver were legitimate candidates. So, I think I would say this, like, had Dan Quinn been the guy all along, you could have gone and fulfilled that rule in a different way. But he was part of a group that they liked, right? So that's partly why it took so long, is that they wanted to interview all these candidates and they were still alive in the postseason. And, so, and then with the requirements, et cetera. So that's why. That's.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The whole, the calendar. I think, by the way, we don't need to go back into this because at this point, it's old news. But that's why the Ben Johnson thing was so weird too. Like, he was still in the playoffs, and they scheduled the interview before the playoffs. And so when he changed his mind, it sucked. But it was less than 48 hours after his season ended when the Commanders were on the plane to Detroit. John Keim, again, ESPN, ESPN.com is with us. So, short question here. What do you make of Dan Quinn as the head coach of the Commanders?
I mean, I know
it's a big sigh, John. That was a big sigh.
It's a big sigh because there's so much with it, and because the reaction to it is not commensurate with the hire. That's why take a deep breath like that. He's a good coach. And I talked throughout this process, I've talked to a lot of people, and everybody was really, really high on Dan Quinn. Now, I say that, and, we all know the history there. We know what happened in Atlanta. He got a team to the Super Bowl. They also blew the lead there, right? That's all part of his history. He had a really good defense in Seattle. He had a really good defense in Dallas. I know he had a bad last game with the Cowboys. Guess what? Sean McVay had a bad last game in Washington, 10 points against the Giants. So don't use one game to measure any coach. But, I know part of the concern is the word retread, or is it Ron 2.0? First of all, he's coming to a different situation than Rivera did. You have a much stronger ownership group. You have a football GM who is in charge. This is not a coach-centric thing. He's not coming to that. And I think the big key for him will be, who do you hire as your OC? And then just staff in general. I don't care who they hired as a coach, whether it's Ben Johnson, Belichick, Mike Vrabel, whomever. The number one key for anybody is to hire a strong staff. If you don't do that, you will not win. When Joe Gibbs came back, the defensive staff was fantastic. The offensive staff was not. The defense was really good for 4 years. The offense was up and down. So, you have to hire a strong staff. And then they have to get the quarterback position right. So that's why I say, I think he's I don't like the word safe pick necessarily. I think he's a proven pick, right? I don't know what the ceiling is here. I have questions. Everybody else is going to have questions. Ideally, you'd like to see a guy this guy, was great here, here, and here. I mean, Seattle plucked Pete Carroll out of USC, but he was an average coach in terms of record at New England and the Jets. And so, I don't know what so it's just hard to know sometimes. And if you get the right quarterback, you can have success. If you hire the right offensive staff, and I say staff because it's not just coordinator, you better have a good quarterbacks coach too, because if your coordinator leaves in a couple of years, you can elevate from within, and keep that same system. I think that was part of his downfall in Atlanta, but also part of the downfall there was the defense was never, that's his side of the ball, was never really good. And so why is that? So what changes is he going to make to his program to make sure that the defense is better than what he had in Atlanta? And so I think those are the things, he's also, some of the things that you hear about him, I mean, this offseason, he spent time talking to, or I think it was, I don't know if it was last offseason maybe, talking to NBA coaches about their process of how do you use, in an era where, players aren't necessarily defined by a position anymore, how do you use them? How do you maximize them? And then transferring that knowledge onto football players, right? So the way you see Micah Parsons used, for example, things like that. So there's a you hear some of that stuff. So it's all good. But again, it still comes down to, do you hire the good staff and do you have a good quarterback? And I would say that for any of these candidates, there are things that were intrigued to me about Anthony Weaver, about Aaron Glenn, about Ben Johnson, about Mike McDonald, right? All those guys. And, I'd have some of the same questions, but the question, what we do know with Quinn is he knows how to build an organization. He knows how to work with the GM in conjunction to build the roster, et cetera. I think those are all important things. So, I think this is a good hire. Is it certainly a fans are going to buy 1 million season tickets tomorrow hire? No. But to me, I've been here in this offseason where moves look great in February and stink in September. So see where it is at the end of the year, and are they headed in the right direction? Are they playing better, more sound football? That's when we'll really know. Right now, it's the start of it. So that's it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think another thing that's interesting with fans and the reaction, and this is, I think, where I'm at, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're with me here, is because he's known And because it's not like Carroll coming from USC who had all of a sudden gone to these new heights, it doesn't feel like the ceiling is as high. But I do think that like the idea, like to go back to something you said earlier in that answer, that he's a football coach coming to coach football, which is not only what didn't happen the last 4 years, but not what he had set up fully in Atlanta either. He had some personnel control and probably a little too much power over the roster in Atlanta, which ultimately went sideways. I think that to me is the ceiling raiser, and the thing that I'm most excited about is the structure's finally sound.
I think that's a big thing too, and you can't. That's why I say like this 2.0 talk is not accurate, for a lot of reasons. But part of it is he's coming to a different organization. So now we don't know how all these guys are going to be in this role. Like Adam Peters has never been in this role in a full-time position, right? And now we do know that Dan Quinn has been in that, but Adam Peters is not. So how does that all work? And will it go? How smoothly will that go? I think that's why they were so big on the quote aligned vision, and it's that's the new buzz phrase with this group, and it's why some candidates were not looked at because they may have wanted too much power, and that was not going to work with their setup. So, I think there's going to be a lot to learn about everybody here. And I agree with you. Like, can he coach, not just coach team to the Super Bowl? We've seen that. He's done that. But can he do it? Can he help build a consistent winner? Because he had a couple years in Atlanta that were good and then a couple that were not. So, that's what we know. And there were also Julio Jones. I think it was Julio Jones in the end zone dropped the one. I think. Yeah, you catch that, and they're back in the NFC Championship game 2 years in a row. So, it's just it's a good hire.
Yeah.
So I never quite understood some of the angst with it. I understand the flashy new toy because it's the unknown, and it's very akin to, do you draft Jaden Daniels or Drake May, or do you sign a veteran quarterback that we already know who this guy is, right? Or do you go for like Jaden Daniels could change the NFL? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, right? Drake May could be this, he could be that. We don't know. So I think I understand how some people that is enticing to people. I mean, even as a reporter, as a writer, it's interesting to me because you're exploring possibilities because you don't know the answer. And but with Quinn, we've seen what he can do as a coach, and there's no reason to think it can't be better or more consistent. And, if you have a couple of years where you win 10, 11 games here, you know how many 11-win seasons I've covered in my time here, Craig?
That would be 0, John. 0.
0. It would be 0.
I wanted to ask you, too, by the way, how many playoff wins have you covered?
2.
2. Dan Quinn had 5 in Atlanta.
I mean, so, but I think part of it, too, is, and I wonder, for fans, and this is what I'm kind of gathering too, they wanted the splashy off seasons. Adam Peters was the GM. Ben Johnson was the coaching candidate. Get them all here because it signals the new day, and it's a different era because of that. And I think that's part of it. But I will say, Peters was a massive hire. That was a really good hire. And, everybody I've heard from Quinn really, really not just likes him, but really respects him. I had somebody who coached with them was like, he does the best job of any coach he'd been around of setting the standard in the building. And that stuff all matters. And it's more than what I've heard for a lot of coaches here. So, but again, Craig, I don't know where it's going to go because I can say all that, but I can't sit here and say, you watch, they're going to roll. I don't know that.
Right.
You have to get the staff right. You have to get the quarterback right. I mean, I've covered 0 quarterbacks who have started for more than 3 years. 0. Yeah.
Haven't you and I covered the same amount that have started 3 years in a row, which is 1, which is Kirk?
Yeah. Well,
sorry for leaving you on the beat then. That's clearly my fault.
I think Gus Farrat was 3 too. Someone else. There was someone else that was 3 as well. But yeah, I mean, and I know a lot of people want the offensive coach. I get it. I think all things being equal, but I've covered 6 or 7 offensive coaches. And in my time here, this offense has stunk. most of the time.
Right.
And it's not just because, they haven't had the quarterback, the organization's bad. I get it. But it's not an end-all, be-all. And arguably the best coach I covered was a defensive guy in Marty Schottenheimer. And, I mean, just for his tenure here, what he did with that roster was terrific. And the owner foolishly fired him and John Schneider at the same time.
Whoopsie daisies.
So it was a bad place to be. But that's the point. Like, it's a different place now. And I think you're going to have based on everything you hear about Adam Peters, you hear about Dan Quinn, that this is just a far better setup than they've had in a long time. Now, again, get the staff right, get the quarterback right, or it won't matter.
Yes, and the staff is kind of the next step. We obviously are hoping to know who the offensive coordinator is, but it feels like we're probably going to have a week of waiting on that if some of these San Francisco guys are in play, because you can't interview anybody. So we will wait with bated breath on that, see what he does on the defensive side. And then it's on to all the draft talk, John. So we got plenty to talk about this offseason. That is for sure the blankest of slates, which in some ways is fun, in some ways is terrifying. John will have all the coverage, though. He's got a story up now on the Quinn hiring and a lot of the stuff we just talked about in more detail on ESPN.com. Highly recommend reading that. And then, of course, his podcast, The John Keim Report, which has episodes very frequently during the week. And then now brand new member exclusive episodes and live streams as well. Go to the Empire Media YouTube page for that. Cakes, always appreciate your time, my friend. Are you going to be in Vegas next week for Super Bowl, doing Indy for Combine? When will I see you next?
No. Owners meetings will be.
You're taking
weather.
You're taking the fancy trips.
It's warm weather.
Yeah, you're smarter than me.
The combine is fine, but it's become this massive thing, and there's like 900 media members there. That's too many.
Yeah, well, they have a radio row, and some of those people will sit down. And John, these 3 hours don't fill themselves.
I know. Listen, that's great. But for me, it's funny though, because they're so busy there. At the owners' meetings, they're relaxed. It's nice weather. It's better quotes.
That is true. That's a vet move right there. All right, John Keim, everybody. Thank you, sir. I'll talk to you.
Thanks, Craig.
All right, Cakes again. ESPN.com for the story. John Keim Report, the podcast. When we get back, John's ESPN colleague Kimberly Martin joins us for her thoughts, and she has some additional reporting on how this all went down as well. Kim, next on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Thanks again to Mike Jones and John Keim, and I now just continue my journey back in my media room past by welcoming in yet another former colleague that I covered the Commanders with back in the day. Now I watch her on television along with you on Get Up, SportsCenter, and the rest of ESPN's NFL platforms. It is our good friend Kim Martin. Kimberly, how are you, ma'am?
I'm good. You literally just got the squad back.
I mean, y'all still got the information. I got a show. We might as well put our skills to good use. I just ask the questions and let you guys tell me things. That's really how the skills are being put to use. I just sit back and let you guys carry. No, but you had some really, I think, great reporting on kind of talking to some folks around this search and this situation. And it runs counter to some narratives that I feel like got out of control about Ben Johnson being the favorite and the Commanders were crushed and, kind of caught with their pants down and whatever. The way you actually
I'm going to push back on that. on that.
Yeah, so what's the actual information you have?
Okay, so like a week and a half ago, it seemed, actually what I was told from people in league circles was like, oh yeah, Ben Johnson to Washington, done deal. Like that's the NFL's worst kept secret, right? That's what I heard from people a week and a half ago and change. But the days, in recent days, talking to people, more people in the league and also more people internally. And you got to be honest, like, everybody wants to act like the Commanders, yet again, they botched this, da-da-da-da-da. Like, let me tell you, from talking to people, Ben Johnson did not impress everybody in his interview. So when they left that initial interview, they still had questions. He was not the clear-cut favorite, this is the guy, right? They were still interested in talking to other people. They still had a list of other people. Now, he was still a candidate in there, which is why they still scheduled a second interview. But this was not, as a lot of people thought, a shoe in Ben Johnson, this is his job. Now, I think, I used to, before I came to the Washington Post, I was a beat writer for the Jets. And I think when you cover teams that have been mired in dysfunction or can't seem to get out of their own way, I think it is very easy to kind of fall into that trap of like, here we go again. They done messed up again. And I don't think that's the case here. When I talked to NFL GM, I had a conversation with an NFL GM yesterday, and he said, he was looking for a head coach this hiring cycle as well. And he said, you got to ask yourself, do you want somebody just for their offense or defense, or are you trying to hire a leader for your team? Because what everybody thought before the hires were made, across the league, teams that have QB situations, they got to go they got to go with an offensive mind, a young guy. We've seen a lot of younger candidates, but there have been a lot of defensive guys that have been hired as head coaches this cycle. And really what it comes down to, talking to so many execs and GMs, is you need to be able to lead these young men. And the game is different. The players are different. And so when I think about Dan Quinn, he impressed in his interview. You need somebody who's going to stand up there, have credibility, talk to these guys, be a player's coach. And Ron Rivera was a player's coach. But I think the difference here with Dan Quinn is you guys have an actual traditional front office structure now. That's the thing that Commanders fans should be happy about. That you have Adam Peters, first-time GM. He's got to nail this draft. He's got to nail the QB situation. And with Dan Quinn's input, you develop a roster. But it's not, Dan Quinn is now responsible for personnel and coaching. And it's more of a traditional setup, which I think bodes well for both Adam Peters and Dan Quinn.
Totally. And to be 100% clear here, yes, and on this, yes, and there is an actual accountability with Dan Quinn. We'll talk about that with former Seahawks linebacker KJ Wright at the top of the hour versus Ron Rivera talked a lot about accountability, and I don't think actually provided it. And part of that might have been the structure, too. He had a lot going on, which Dan Quinn won't. So, Kim, let's pretend we're on the Get Upset, and it's, we ignore the process, and, we kind of, I don't know, we use a magical time machine here. If I told you at the beginning of all of this, Commanders hired Dan Quinn, you think you're sitting on that desk praising the hire?
I get it. We had this conversation on First Take too today, and Stephen A. we were all asked, like, how do you feel about it? And Stephen A. was like, I'm not sold on it. And I asked the follow-up, because of when he was hired, being the last guy, does that change things? I think if you're a Commanders fan, it's hard to feel. I would not be surprised if there were Commanders fans who did not feel pumped, because they literally are the last. It's almost like we're the last team picked, man. We're the last team that got somebody. So when you have the introductory press conferences, Quinn, and it says, and they're saying, this is the guy, it's sort of like, well, if he's the guy, why did it take so long to hire the guy? But I think that necessarily is an issue. You want to get the right guy, because what we've seen over the last few years, I think within the last 3 years, every team has turned over its OC. We have had head coaches gone after one season or 2 seasons. And you have a lot of head coaches right now that are lame ducks heading into this year. So I'm fine if it takes a long time to narrow down and make sure you get the right guy. So if you thought Ben Johnson might have been it, and then something gave you pause and you're like, you know what? Actually, you know what? This is the guy we want. I'm cool with that. What should trouble people a little bit is the fact that this process, I think, hindsight, took longer than they probably wanted it to. And now you have the top OCs, and now Quinn is obviously a defensive guy, but now the top OCs are off the board, theoretically. I'm going to say top, meaning like the guys that were highly coveted, right? So now it's like you're looking around, it's music, okay, like who else is left? And you don't want a fan base to feel like we're just left with scraps. But there are a lot of talented football guys out there, and there are a lot of first-time head coaches. Dan Quinn needs to nail the OC hire, and Adam Peters has to nail the quarterback. Like, that literally is it. And it doesn't, I don't think the Commanders are in this, like, woe is me situation. When you talk to people about Dan Quinn, he's respected. He is a player's coach, and he knows what he's doing. And I don't think the Cowboys, game against the Packers, while it was embarrassing, I don't think that should be completely used against Dan Quinn, because there are a lot of coaches right now who got head coaching jobs, and there's a reason they're available right now. Their team's lost. Now, what the Cowboys did on defense and offense was terrible, and I don't think his previous head coaching record necessarily should be held against him, because you can make the same argument with Raheem Morris. The expectation is that you've learned about yourself and you've grown, so that the next time you're in this position, you know how to be a better head coach.
Have you talked to coaches about that over the years? Guys like Pete Carroll, who was a pretty mediocre head coach his first time around the NFL, obviously had a lot of years and a lot of college success in between it. But whether it's, Pete Carroll, Belichick, on down the list you go. Tony Dungy was a guy that was a retread. He happened to retread with Peyton Manning and win a Super Bowl. Is there something that those coaches that you think have done well their second time around that Dan Quinn needs to do to be successful in Washington?
Well, I think, his focus will be defense. That's why it's really important who he has around him on the offensive side of the ball, who's going to help groom this young quarterback. But I think, look at any coach who gets another opportunity, you're in the job for the first time. So you don't even know how to be a head coach. I think what trips guys up a lot of times is if you're a coordinator, you're so used to focusing on your side of the ball. As a head coach, you are a CEO of a team, of an organization. In some respects, beyond just the quarterback, you're also the face of the organization as well. So you're being pulled in multiple directions. And you need to be able to trust that the people you hire can also disseminate your message, keep the culture intact within their individual meeting rooms. Like, it's got to be a trickle-down effect. And what you need to be able to be a clear communicator of what you want, so that even when you're not in the room, people understand that the standard still has to be met. And I think when you have a job for the first time, let's be honest. Like, anytime we start a new job, we're not going to know what the hell we're doing. Like, that's just the reality. Right. And you need the reps. At the same time we talk about quarterbacks, you need reps. But you also have to understand that there are a lot of working relationships within a front office. Like, as a head coach, you're working with your GM. If those two people are not in lockstep, your organization is in trouble. Like, you got to be team players. And when things don't go well, hypothetically, new regime, are they going to hit the ground running? I don't know. But if they don't, you still have to maintain whatever vision Adam Peters and Dan Quinn set out to create, whatever vision they had for this franchise, whatever plan for the long term for sustainable success, they have to stick to that plan. And if anybody deviates, that's where problems arise. I think you've got to be a good delegator. But I think, given that Peters is in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan, who also has experience with Dan Quinn, in the NFL, people trust the people that they know, right? So they're going to ask, what's he like to work with? What kind of dude is he? And I've never heard a bad thing about Dan Quinn. Besides, the thing that people point to was his record in Atlanta, and then obviously how the Cowboys finished. But in all honesty, he took the Cowboys defense. I think they were 28th in points, 23 in yards allowed, when he got there. And we've praised this defense in the time that he's been there. So I don't want to hold one game against him, but he has an opportunity to completely rebuild the culture and set a new standard as what's expected in Washington.
Yes, it just feels like a very anti-Washington hire, and considering what the history has been in Washington, that's great. Sign me up. Kimberly Martin, you can read her reporting, obviously, through ESPN, ESPN.com. Mostly, you're going to catch her on television. First Take, Get Up, Sports Center, NFL Live, on down the list. Y'all know how to watch the NFL coverage on ESPN. You're very smart people, this audience. Kim, always great to catch up. Hopefully, I'll catch you next week in Vegas or in Indy at the Combine.
For sure. Yeah.
And until then, safe travels and have fun with the rest of the NFL weekend. All right, that is Kim Martin with us here on the Hoffman Show. When we get back, if we got people on hold, we can get to them. We can talk amongst ourselves. And then coming up at 6 o'clock, we're going to talk to Seahawks linebacker, or former Seahawks linebacker, played for Dan Quinn in Seattle, KJ Wright. So we're locked and loaded. Back half of the Hoffman Show, full steam ahead. Next here on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live on the free Odyssey app. We're also streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Big day on the YouTubes. Lots of people checking in on the show. If you're new here, we do this every day. This is a radio show that is 4 to 7 each and every day here on the Team 980. And if you want Commanders news, you are definitely going to want to tune us in every day of the offseason. We have full coverage every day, all the time. We'll have draft coverage, free agency coverage, all of it. This is your spot. Make sure that you lock it in daily for the Hoffman Show, whether you're watching us on YouTube, streaming us live on the free Odyssey app, or, of course, listening old school style on your radio. Anthony, I'm at home today. Do you happen to have the breaking news sounder in front of you? If not, then we'll just tell people the news.
Sadly, I do not.
Okay, we don't have the breaking news. The breaking news. Oh, snap, news is broken. Breaking news sounder. Alas, though, the Commanders are not done rating the Cowboys' defensive cabinet. The guy who was thought to be the favorite in-house to replace Dan Quinn in Dallas was their defensive backs coach and not the DB's coach, their pass game coordinator, Joe Witt Jr. Not so fast, my Cowboy friends. No, he's coming to be Dan Quinn's defensive coordinator. That, according to longtime NFL reporter Aaron Wilson. Witt has been with DQ for a while. He was with him his final year in Atlanta, followed him to Dallas. There's a couple of other guys that are, I don't call them like Quinn loyalists, but kind of his top guys that certainly could come with him. And I think unlike when Rivera brought, Scott Turner, these are highly respected coaches who are really good at what they do, which is very exciting because, Anthony, the one thing that I am pretty fascinated about for this upcoming season is figuring out just how bad the previous regime was at coaching versus scouting. And what I mean by that is I don't actually believe right now, this could easily be proven wrong. So I'm not putting a lot of stock into this take. But if you ask me where the divide is, I would tell you they were way, way worse at coaching than scouting. Do I think there are some definitive misses? Yeah, I think there's a couple of guys where they straight up wasted picks. I'm not going to name names. That feels incredibly mean. Some of those guys are already gone. Look, Antonio Gandy Golden obviously is one of them back in 2020. His fourth rounder is out of the league. Whoopsie daisy. We'll see if some of the picks last year, I guess I can just say the name because it's kind of easy to figure out. We'll see if Braden Daniels turns into something, right? Last year, totally lost year. Didn't look like he was ready in camp. Most people thought that was a very, very bad pick, especially if he was going to play tackle. And then he gets hurt and zero is a rookie year, and hopefully he gets healthy and he turns into a good something. Maybe he does. But they took guys in certain situations, maybe some like Jamin Davis slightly overdrafted or majorly overdrafted, depending on what you thought of him, but they just didn't use him very well. And I look at Emmanuel Forbes and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think he forgot how to pick off the ball. I don't think he forgot how to play DB. I think he was coached like absolute dog dookie his rookie year. I think that Quan Martin could have been way more effective a lot sooner if he wasn't overloaded like crazy with 4 positions in training camp. And so it's very clear watching last year, all the coverage busts, they weren't taught very well. Their schemes and what their responsibilities weren't very clean. That stuff didn't happen with near regularity in Dallas. Now, did they get beat sometimes? Yeah. They were super aggressive defense, and sometimes that backfired. But damn it, they did what they were supposed to with high amounts of regularity, which is why Dan Quinn got to a team that was 6-10 the year before he got there as defensive coordinator, and they went 12-5 the 3 next years. Yes, Dak Prescott and that offense was a big part of it. CeeDee Lamb's development is a huge part of it. But good gracious, that defense with Micah Parsons as the head of the spear destroyed some teams and did enough in a lot of other games, and would have key plays even in games where they didn't play particularly well. A pick 6 here, a strip sack there. They have a knack for making plays. And so I look at the talent on this roster, and I don't know if John Allen is going to be here. I do know that our event tomorrow night got way more interesting today. I do know that if you want one of the remaining 20 tickets for 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980 Live, now would be a really smart time to go to BethesdaTheater.com and get them, because John is going to talk about all of this tomorrow night. I have no idea what he's going to say, but he's going to say it. So I think that, when you look at Payne and can he be used more creatively? Obviously, he's a very different player than Micah Parsons, but Deron Payne could line up on the end and pass rush situations and give a tackle a nightmare. Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio never did that. They did it like literally one snap this year, and Payne got a pressure. Quinn might do that with some frequency because Payne's such a freakish pass rusher. I'm pretty excited about that. I'm excited to see if he can turn Jamin Davis into something different. I'm excited to see what he does with a guy like Quan Martin. I'm excited to see if Emmanuel Forbes in a scheme and a philosophy that seems to fit his skill set far better than the one that actually drafted him. And who knows? Maybe those guys actually are bad football players or not as good as they're paid in Payne's case, or whatever version of bad that they turn out to be. But I don't think it's going to be because of the coaching. And Dan Quinn is excellent as a teacher and a coach and a football philosopher, if you will. And now it looks like Joe Witt Jr., the number 2 in Dallas, is going to be the number 1 on the defensive side here. Now, I do think one thing that is interesting that you are about to hear, as I had the chance earlier today to catch up with KJ Wright, former Seahawks linebacker, is I hope that even with Joe Witt coming, Dan Quinn still is the defensive play caller in DC. KJ Wright will tell you why next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube. And if you're looking for good football content on YouTube, can I recommend for you KJ All Day with former Seahawks linebacker KJ Wright, who joins us now, of course, played for Dan Quinn when Quinn was the defensive coordinator in Seattle. KJ, appreciate you, man. Thanks for some time.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. Big news over there in Washington. You guys got your guy in Dan Quinn, my former coach. So thoroughly excited for him. I'm happy for him. It's going to be a really fun ride over there in Washington.
Yeah, so talk to me about DQ, because obviously, you know, a lot of fans here, they just see the resume of like, oh, he's a retread. It looks a lot like Rivera's resume, and people are nervous. But you played for the guy. You know him. What makes DQ special? Why does everybody that's played for him love this guy?
First off, he's an awesome human being. He's an awesome person, and I love the man. He finds out what you're doing off the field, sees how your family's doing, see what you're going through mentally throughout the season, and so he gets that part of you just being a human being. And then you just go to the football side. The guy is a solid dude. He's a brilliant mind. When you talk about the personalities that we had in Seattle, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, or Michael Bennett, like, you need a phenomenal leader to lead a bunch of those guys. And he held everyone to a very high standard. As talented and as good as we were, when we did mess up, Dan Quinn was the guy to address it and to make sure that we not slip. And obviously, what you saw, we was the most dominating defense for 4 years in a row. And so just an awesome mind. He knows at the right time when to call a certain coverage, when to dial up a certain blitz, and he can things happen on the football field. That makes for a perfect coordinator. It makes for a perfect coach, the way he just puts guys in position to be successful. And so there's not no Ron Rivera 2.0, two different personalities at that. And so it's going to be really, really different over there with the Commanders.
I'm glad that you said that, because I'm tired of hearing that comment, and he's been the head coach for a few hours now. I mean, I was tired of it before he was named head coach and he was a candidate. You know, that humanness, though, is the thing that I think a lot of people said about Rom, where they connect that dot. But I think it's totally different in that accountability level, the ability to both be your friend but be your coach.
Mm-hmm.
How did he walk that line, when I think that's, by the way, where Rivera failed tremendously and why things went sideways for him, both in Carolina and here? How does DQ accomplish that?
Oh, he understood timing like no other. He understood that when it's Tell the Truth Monday, when we come into this film room, if you played great, life is good. You know, you did good. But, hey, I saw this, and let's tighten up on this. And if you went out there and you had a bad game, he really addresses it face-to-face, man-to-man. He's not out there bashing you, just dog cussing you. That's not his style at all. But it's like a genuine, authentic, solid approach that we need as men and that we need as NFL players. And so for him to just understand that, life is good. We're going to have some fun. We're going to just celebrate our wins. But throughout this journey, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to address it. And it's going to come from the quarterback. It's going to come to the running back, to the receivers. And so that's a really healthy environment that he created over there in Seattle. Went to Atlanta and learned, went to a Super Bowl and learned. And I believe that what people are upset with when it comes to the hiring of Dan Quinn is the Packers game. That 48-point loss that they had to Green Bay. That sucked. That stung. They all played terrible that ball game.
Yeah.
But look at the holistic approach that Dan has brought to the Dallas Cowboys. Look what he's done for that defense. Those guys did a lot of really good things this season. And I believe that you will see he's going to do a lot of really good things for the Commanders as well.
KJ Wright is with us. KJ All Day on YouTube, also doing radio for Cairo up in Seattle, one of the nation's great sports radio stations. So, KJ, I was telling you this when we were setting up this call a little earlier today, but I do a podcast with Logan Paulson, who played for him in Atlanta. And after Dan got fired in Atlanta, he called Logan, and I'm assuming Logan was one of many, many calls that he made, and was basically like, hey, man, like, I'm looking for perspective on what went sideways here. What do you think? I'm curious if you've ever had those kinds of conversations with Dan, and if you did, what'd you tell him? What are you willing to share? Because it is ultimately a private conversation. But also, just from what you've seen and observed as someone who knows him, like, what would you tell him about being a head coach that second time around?
Yeah, what I would tell Dan is, obviously when we worked together, we kicked tail. Like, we went to back-to-back Super Bowls, #1 defense, so everything was really great. The thing that Dan has to do, if you're going to be the head coach, you still need to call plays. You still need to be the play caller. I know that when he went to Atlanta, Richard Smith was the D coordinator, and he was making the play calls, no DQ. You have a phenomenal mind. You're a brilliant guy. You have got to be able to balance both of those responsibilities. You see DeMeco Ryans is doing it, Kyle Shanahan, McVay, like all of those guys are the head coach and the play caller. So do not let the responsibility go to anyone else. This is your second time around doing this. The fan base, they're already kind of on edge. They're already a little iffy. And so you don't want to leave this defense up to anyone else. But so make sure that you're the one that's doing it. Surround yourself around the right guys. Get the right coordinator in that building, because it's going to be an uphill battle. It won't be easy. But if anyone's up for the challenge and if anyone can't execute it, I promise you it's DQ.
So obviously Commanders have #2 pick in the draft. A lot of people think they're going to go quarterback. And the big concern with hiring a defensive head coach, whether it was Dan or anybody else, with the guy you guys got up there in Seattle and Mike McDonald, was going to be, well, how do you build this long-term relationship between a coach and a quarterback? You were in that building with Pete and Russ, who were able to do it for a long time. And obviously, as we all know, that wasn't always smooth, but it worked. They all won a ton of games. So how can a defensive head coach ultimately build a good long-term sustainable relationship with a quarterback and keep that offensive continuity so that quarterback can thrive if they go there at #2?
Well, let's just look at it let's just look at the big picture. I spoke with John Snyder this offseason, and I asked him, what's your approach when it comes to drafting guys? And he said, in the past, we did a lot of reaching for guys. We reached for defensive ends. We reached for running backs. They made a lot of blunders when it came to drafting players a few years here in Seattle. And so if you're up there in Commanders, I know you want a quarterback. I know you want that guy. But don't feel like you got to reach early in the draft to just say, oh, I'm going to get a quarterback. To heck with that. Take the best player on the board. There are a lot of holes with this Commanders football team. Quarterback is obvious position. You can go up and down the roster to find guys. And so whoever you decide to draft at that spot, make sure that they are a guy that you could build around. It's not necessarily a quarterback. Evaluate all of those guys, whether it's Caleb, whether it's quarterback from North Carolina. Evaluate all of those guys and see who is the best player here that we can build around and take this thing going forward.
KJ Wright is with us, of course, former Seahawks linebacker, Pro Bowler, now in the media world, KJ All Day on YouTube, and has a radio show that you can find on Cairo as well. The podcast, you can also search that. Just search KJ Wright Show in your favorite podcast app. You want to check out what they're talking about up there in Seattle. So, KJ, one of the most interesting things to me when looking at the current Commanders roster and where DQ has had some issues in Dallas with that D-line or with that defense is up the middle, a little bit light. Teams that have had success have run on them. Obviously, there's only been so many. I think that gets overblown because of that Packers game that you mentioned. But when teams have found it, they've been able to run on them. Well, he comes here and there's, we don't know what the talent is. It was very poorly coached. So they might have a lot of talent here, but it doesn't appear that way. But John Allen and Daron Payne are fantastic. Oh, yeah. Jamin Davis is a big dude as a middle linebacker. How do you think DQ's defensive style and kind of the principles and philosophies he has meshes with that spine of this defense?
Yeah, and here's the beauty of DQ. DQ is he's a multiple. He can run multiple things on the football field. He can come out there with a bare front. He can come out there with the over front that we ran a lot in Seattle. And so you saw how he utilized Michael Parsons this throughout his career. Put him on the edge, put him at off-the-ball linebacker. He's not just this is what I do type of coordinator. There are multiple things that Dan Quinn can't do. He's been around the game forever, and he's going to come in there. He's going to come in there and watch that tape, look at that film, and say, how do I want to design this football team? How do I want to design the way that we approach and attack? Who are my best guys? Let me put them in position to go out there and dominate and make plays. That is what he does well. When he was with us in Seattle, all of these guys are good. Let me just run the same play all over and over.
Right.
And you saw what he did. Yeah, you saw what he did with the Cowboys. okay, I got these corners that's making plays. Let me do a little shell coverage. Let me disguise cover 3. We're going to rotate to cover 2. Deron Bland, you go out there and have 5, 6 pick sixes. Michael Parsons, you're on the edge. I'm going to put you up the middle. You beat this guard left and right. Like, the way that he's creative, the way he utilizes his talent is like no other I've seen. And so, really in mind, I can't emphasize it enough. But once he gets there and turn on that tape, watch those guys, then he's going to design his defense. So when those guys come there in OTAs, they're ready to roll.
So I'm a subscriber to the dude theory, which is get dudes, put them in position to make plays, as opposed to the scheme theory. It's like, the scheme will take care of all of it. It's like, no, figure out what you need, get those guys, put them in position. You're telling me I'm going to like Dan Quinn.
You're going to love Dan Quinn. And heck no, the scheme is a part of it. Yeah, it's a part of it, but you best believe you need dudes to bring it to life. So you need the Jimmys and the Joes to go out there and execute. To say, hey, take this lineman, whoop his ass, get off the block, and go make the play. And so that's football, but obviously you need a coach to put him in the right spot so he can just bring out his skill set.
I'm chuckling because the line up, whoop his ass is like John Allen's literal favorite phrase. Yeah, I've heard John Allen say that more than anything else John Allen has ever said. So I'm going to cut that clip. We have an event tomorrow night with our radio stations, and John is our special guest. I'm just going to play that for John Allen and then watch him dance around the stage. KJ Wright, you can catch him on YouTube, KJ all day. And then, of course, the radio show for Cairo up there in Seattle as well. This was great, dude. I hope that there's more news in some form or fashion that happens and we can get you back on the show sometime soon. Really appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, that is KJ Wright. Again, you just heard where you can catch him on YouTube and his radio show if you want the podcast of that on demand. Reaction up there to the Mike McDonald hiring, and I'm sure they'll have some thoughts on DQ coming here. You can search the KJ Wright Show on your favorite podcast app. If you missed any of our show today, make sure you search the Hoffman Show on your favorite podcast app, because there you'll find interviews with Mike Jones, John Keim, Kim Martin, and now KJ Wright. Coming up next, though, we'll get back to the phones. Yes, 6 p.m. hour. What's up with you guys? 301-230-0980. Your thoughts on Dan Quinn being the head coach of the Washington Commanders. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980. Taking your calls on the Ace Law listener line for the rest of the show. What's up, 6P hour? Don't take calls here very often, but happy to today at 301-230-0980. If you're in a wreck, Ace Law helps you get a check. Call 8888 ACE Law. Let's get things started with Cliff. Cliff, what's up, man? Thanks for calling. What do you think of Dan Quinn being the head coach of the Commanders?
Hey, what's going on, Craig? I think it's a great hire because it looks like it's going to be a better upgrade over Jack, a.k.a. Vanessa Del Rio, and
I don't know that we need to do all the name. We don't need to do all the name calling. I was not a Jack Del Rio fan, but we can be professionals.
Okay, I understand. I have a question about our two linebackers. What do you think about them in free agency? Brian Burns from Carolina, who's an unrestricted free agent, and Azeez Al-Shaair, also unrestricted free agent of the Tennessee Titans, formerly San Francisco 49er, who I heard Adam Peters talking about earlier when he was first hired, who just racked up 160-plus tackles this season.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. If you can get Burns out of Carolina, that is about as good of free agent money as I think you can spend this offseason if you're the Washington Commanders. I think you need one premier pass rusher, and I don't know how you get it. This is a very, very light drafted edge. And I say you need one premier pass rusher because finally we know who the coach is. We know that Dan Quinn, if you give him one guy, he can move that guy around and maximize him in the way that he's done with Micah Parsons. And I think that's an exciting proposition. I think the problem is Brian Burns has been trying to get out of Carolina forever, and they just refuse to trade him. And even though he's got his way to unrestricted free agency, that franchise tag deadline is going to probably catch Brian Burns. I would imagine that he is tagged. You're not going to trade, multiple firsts for him. Like, would I trade a second or a third for Brian Burns? I would think about it. He's nasty. He's a great pass rusher, good, like true 4-3 edge. I would think about it. They got to find someone, and this draft is not a great place to look. Even though they have three top 50 picks. It's tough. The linebacker you mentioned, Al-Shaair from Tennessee and San Francisco. I got to check his age and all that kind of stuff. It's funny because Ant, this week, what was our plan this week? What were we going to finally do this week? There was a thing that we had talked about doing for weeks that Commanders fans are very interested in. Cough, NFL draft related.
Is it on the sheets?
It was on the sheets, and we've had to kick it out every single day because coaching stuff has happened.
I'm blanking.
We were going to do the ultimate guide to the quarterback class.
Oh, yeah.
So I have been focused on draft quarterback class. I'm not watching free agent linebackers right now. Your boy is a one-man operation when it comes to the takes. I do my own stunts. I obviously talk to people. But at the end of the day, like, I don't have a great file on Al-Shaair other than to say, like, I know he's been a tremendous player. Very productive player over his time in the NFL, but linebackers tend to fall off the cliff. I don't know how old he is, so I don't have thoughts. Clearly, linebacker is a position where I think they should address. Although I will say Cody Barton was a lot better at the tail end of last year, and I like who Jamin has become as a player. That doesn't necessarily mean I would sign him long term. All right, back to the phones. 301-230-0980. Let's go to Tim. Tim, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Thank you for taking my call. In addition to being curious about who the OC and special teams coordinator will be and the extent to which the new head coach is going to let them run their show versus get involved, I'm a little curious about that. But the two other questions I have, and I'm very excited about the hire, but the two questions I have is one, how does Adam Peters view Quinn? Because, San Francisco was just whipping on the Cowboys the last 3 years. They booted them out of the playoffs the first 2 years, and then this year whipped them 42-10. So I'm really curious what Peter sees in him in terms of what he did for the defense, because he clearly didn't solve the 49ers. And then the last question I have is for him himself is what happened versus Green Bay. How much of that is on Quinn, and how will Quinn avoid such performances like they had against Green Bay in his future as a head coach? Those are really my questions.
Yeah, Tim, thanks for the call. I think those are the questions that Dan Quinn needed to have some level of answer for in the interview process. And I would say in terms of what Adam Peters thinks of Quinn, clearly very highly. He's the general manager who just hired him. And I don't get the sense from talking to people who I actually trust in the media, including Kim Martin and John Keim in the 5 o'clock hour today, that this was some settle for them, that this wasn't their top choice. Now, granted, do we look back in 5 years and go, man, that hiring cycle that we all thought was filled with great candidates actually was terrible, and the Commanders were a part of it, and they'll be back in the mix again. But I do think he, as a head coach, is an appealing candidate, especially if you're just asking him to coach. He's going to have to make tweaks. But I will say this, outside of Mike Macdonald, nobody else did particularly well against San Francisco. So I'm not going to hold you, getting wrecked by Kyle Shanahan and the team that I'm going to pick next week to win the Super Bowl, and the team I picked at the beginning of the year to win the Super Bowl, as means you can't coach. Maybe you got other problems on your team, but a good DC isn't just going to be able to, and by himself is not going to be able to just shut down the best offense in football. Obviously, the Ravens with Macdonald and what he implemented as a plan, but also what the players executed were able to do that, and it's basically been only them. As for the other part of the question, which I'm now tremendously Green Bay. They're going to have to figure out defensively how to face these Shanahan offenses because there's just going to be more of them. But also, that's the offense he's about to employ, likely as an offensive coordinator. So I would tend to think that there's going to be more solutions there. And I think the problems are actually easily identifiable in a lot of ways. They get moved off the ball, and it's a lighter defense that is designed to be up and then rush the passer. And the Cowboys' offense was terrible in the Green Bay game in the first half, which allowed Green Bay to just get up and start running the football. And that's not how the Cowboys were built. So it's a complementary thing as well. Let's go to Mike in Bladensburg. Mike, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
What's up, Craig? How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay. I'm cautiously optimistic about the hire. I think we went through so many years with ups and downs and stuff, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm just not, jumping all in right now.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Thanks for the call. I think that is kind of where I am, is I like the setup. I like the candidate. I'm not over the moon about it. I don't at this time see unlimited sky potential where all of a sudden I think Dan Quinn is probably going to come here and be in the Hall of Fame. And that is why we had a caller earlier that's I would have rather just taken a gigantic swing on Bobby Slowick. And from my seat, I actually agree with that. I have heard enough people speak highly of Slowick that I might have just said, screw it. It might be a year early, but we can buttress him and surround him with a more veteran staff. We can bring in people that are more veteran as defensive coordinator, as a special teams coach, to make sure he's got what he needs to be successful. Maybe you hire Chris Tabor, who was the interim in Carolina and did a good job as a special teams coach, and he can help a guy like Bobby Slowick, be a head coach in year one until he kind of understands the things that he doesn't even know he doesn't know yet, and he could be the next great guy. But I also wasn't in those interviews, and I think that's the thing we need to remember here is we have Bob Myers, who is one of the best executives in sports, period, the last 15 years. We have Rick Spielman, former NFL Executive of the Year. You have Mitchell Rales, who's built multiple million-dollar businesses and is a billionaire. Josh Harris, who has built a billion-dollar business. And Magic Johnson, who's Magic bleeping Johnson, in on these interviews, and they're coming out of this going, Dan Quinn's the guy. If he's the guy and Adam Peters is with it, I kind of go, okay, you guys did the work. I trust that unlike previous regimes, you actually did that work. Let's see what happens. And it starts with the staff, which is obviously, as we told you earlier, is reported by Aaron Wilson, a longtime NFL reporter based in Houston. Joe Witt is going to be the defensive coordinator. He was the deputy in Dallas to Dan Quinn. And it looks like Quinn is not going to be replaced by him with the Cowboys, but instead is going to weaken the Cowboys even more and bring Joe Witt Jr. with him to D.C. More of your calls next, 301-230-0980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. I've been sitting in the same place for too long, Anthony. I think it was time to switch up the set. So as I did, unfortunately, I knocked one of the pads of my headphones off. So I'm going to have to go get that for a second. But if you're watching live on YouTube, yeah, I'm just sitting on my couch now. We got a different mic over here, but it's all working. So we're all good.
Is the couch more comfortable?
Yes, I needed this. I also need to go get that headphone pad. So I will tell people to dial us at 301-230. Can I walk and talk at the same time? 301-230-0980. Oh, okay, we got the headphone pad. Oh boy, but yeah, it's been a day, and so we're just we're mixing it up here. You know, you never know what you get when you watch the YouTube stream. Alas, Anthony, we've had a great show, and people should definitely go check out everything on demand if you missed any of it. But we still got more calls, and I'm very excited about that. So let's get to them, shall we? Let's go to Eric in Sterling. Eric, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, how are you guys? It's nice to see that the Washington team here finally got their new head coach, and seems like he comes with a lot of experience. As a coach in the NFL, that's good. Heard a lot of good things. I loved what I heard from that, Seattle Seahawks player that, spoke about him there earlier as well. One thing I just want to mention, and you tell me what your thoughts are on this, but I know they have the second pick in the first round. They've got a total of 9 picks this draft season, which is golden. That's terrific. I wonder if it would make sense, in all fairness to their quarterback, Sam Howell, if maybe, since he almost did pass for 4,000 yards this season, and despite 21 interceptions and all the sacks he got, still he had 21 touchdowns on the season as well in his first full season as a quarterback. Now, I want to be sure I don't forget to mention this. That was done with the most god-awful offensive line I think I've ever seen.
All right, what's the point you're getting to here? Because that's not true, and I don't know what the point is here.
Yeah, I think they need to have a much better offensive line first and foremost before they go out and go looking for another quarterback. I do think Sam Howell is a mighty good quarterback if you stand back and look at him.
Thanks for the call, Eric. We're not doing Sam Howell calls on the day that they hired Dan Quinn. That's just not what we're going to do. And the quick response is no. Like Sam Howell, I was on Sam Howell for a long time this year. I like Sam Howell a lot. However, I liked Sam Howell a lot. However, ultimately, the flaws that were in the scouting profile when he came out of college all came true this year. It is, you have the second overall pick. You have, whether you use the second overall pick and on a quarterback, or you trade back and get one, like you got to come out of the first 2 rounds of this draft with a quarterback. Simple as that. And we'll see what Dan Quinn and company, and obviously Adam Peters does. I mean, who knows? Maybe they look at it and they think they can fix Sam, and there's Marvin Harrison Jr. is a part of that fix, or Joe Alt or whoever, maybe. But again, the schematic elements of why that offensive line performed badly and the play calling elements of why that offensive line performed badly were made an average line per snap underlying data look like one of the worst in the NFL. And just, I thought we were done with that. So let's be done with that. Let's go to Anthony. I don't want to mess up the pronunciation, so I'm going to have you give me either in my ear or over the air pronunciation here. Line 2. I wanted to make sure I get the name right. Go ahead. You're on the Hoffman Show. Ba, are you there?
I'm here, my brother. How y'all doing?
Doing well. All right. What you think of the Dan Quinn hire?
Honestly, I was just telling. I was not. I didn't want Dan Quinn. I'm be honest with you. You know, all this day I've been tweeting saying no Quinn, no Quinn. But today after they hire him, I kind of look at something else because you know what? This guy been coaching in the same division for the last 3 years. He know the Eagles. He know the Cowboys. He know the Giants. Those are the people we gotta fight. And the other thing we gotta look at is his team went down because the defense didn't play. Let's just be real. We didn't have a good defense. So I'm hoping Dan Quinn can get that right. So now when he comes to the offensive coordinator, if we keep him same, I'll let the EB run the stuff. But
okay, we're done. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing the Sam what if thing. Anthony, am I gonna have to ban callers in the 6 o'clock hour? We're doing Dan Quinn calls. We got 4 months to talk about quarterback, 3 months to talk about quarterback. We're not doing Sam Howell calls today. Eric Bieniemy's not going to be staying. I would be stunned if Eric Bieniemy is staying. We're going to keep it moving. Let's go to Patrick. Patrick, thanks for calling. Please don't talk about Sam Howell. What do you think about Dan Quinn?
No, we have plenty of time to talk about that. Actually, I'm guardedly optimistic. I would say that I would thought we may have actually gone a younger route and go to Vrabel, just who got let go in Tennessee, and I probably mispronounced the names. Forgive me.
Vrabel. Yeah, no, you got it.
So I'm looking at it as the guy has consistently been part of winning organizations, which God knows the Washington franchise has needed that for many, many, many decades. So I'm optimistic about that, but I think the bigger question, and this is just a rhetorical question, of course, it always bothers me to see Cowboys products being rebranded as Washington products, but is the Dallas Cowboys now a franchise in decline? I think that's the bigger question.
That's an interesting thought. I appreciate the call, Patrick. Here's the thing real quick with Vrabel. Vrabel wanted power, and that was clear in Tennessee. And I understand after what happened to his roster in Tennessee why he wanted power, because he felt like it got decimated. But you got to remember that Adam Peters is the guy in charge here, and that that Ran Carthon is the GM in Tennessee now, and Vrabel and Carthon did not get along, and Adam Peters worked with Carthon in San Francisco. And so while Peters and Vrabel were together in New England, Vrabel was still just a player then. I have to think that is a huge deal, and Keim, kind of said it as much earlier on in the show when he joined us. I do think this hurts the Cowboys quite a bit. The Cowboys now have a pretty intense cap situation where they're going to have to make some tough calls. They've got to find in a year where their head coach is on the hot seat a new defensive coordinator, and that's really hard. And especially if Joe Witt Jr., the lieutenant, number one guy behind Dan Quinn in Dallas, is going to be the defensive coordinator here in DC and come with DQ. That's a huge blow to the Cowboys because, think about the offensive coordinator search for Washington last year, right? And let's take away what we think about Bieniemy now and think about what we thought of him at the time. We were excited about the hire because his resume was great, but, if you wanted to go the younger, hotshot coach, that guy wasn't coming to work for Ron Rivera in a year where everyone thought Ron Rivera was going to get fired. Well, now Mike McCarthy, who's got, hey, dude, if you win 12 games and lose in the playoffs again, that's not good enough as the bar before Jerry Jones jettisons him. Whew. That's going to be tough for Mike McCarthy, offensive head coach, to hire a premier DC. So that is something to keep an eye on in the division. And I have real questions about the Eagles and what they do. Jason Kelce retiring, likely, some of their talent on the way out. And obviously they finished tremendously poorly. I will say a weak NFC East that Washington surprisingly wins earlier than people expect hasn't exactly worked out long-term in the past, but it is something to watch, obviously, moving forward. Let's see. What time is it? We got time for one more. Squeeze it in, and then we can probably get one or two more in our final segment before we hit real things. Let's go to Tyler. Tyler, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
All right. How y'all doing?
Doing well.
All right. Yeah, I think Dan Quinn hire is really good. I mean, it's not the big splash, but overall, I think he's a man that can turn this team around. I think people compare him to Rivera a lot, which I think is, I mean, stat-wise, I can see it, but I think it's really unfair. I think he's a lot different. I just hate to see Rivera crossing his arms, not getting excited. I think Dan Quinn has the leadership and the mentality and personality that we need to turn this team around.
Yeah, Tyler,
So
I agree with that.
I give it a B.
Yeah.
Yeah, I give it a B as a grade on it. I mean, it's like nothing fancy, but I think he can get the job done.
No, I don't disagree. Thanks so much for the call. All right, we got a couple more calls already lining up, so let's take this break, come back, try to squeeze in as many as we can before the end of the show. First, though, a look at what is trending.
Here's what's trending on the Team 980.
Wrapping up here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Anthony, I have just discovered a flaw. If you're watching on YouTube, I've gone to the auxiliary set in my home studio, aka my couch, where I set up a nice microphone and all of that kind of stuff. But Anthony, I've discovered a flaw. Those big fancy lights that I got, where the one on the right side is placed right now, is blocking the second hand on my clock. So during the Real Things stinger, I might have to run up and move it so I can see the second timer so that I make sure I end the show on time.
And this is your first time noticing this.
Well, I haven't needed the second hand until now.
True.
This is the first time we're using this set.
Yeah, and this late in the day.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, shoot, these days, this segment never happens. Got so many basketball games. The 6:45 segment. What is it? What do you mean? Our show goes till 7? Who knew? Who knew? If you're new to the show, welcome. Appreciate you. We do this every day. We start at 4 o'clock. If you've enjoyed it, say you're tuning in because you heard the Dan Quinn news. We have a podcast as well of this very radio show. I also do another podcast with Logan Paulson, who used to play for the Commanders. We are taping an episode of that tomorrow morning. Very excited for that. Logan played in Atlanta for Dan Quinn. I think we might have one of his former teammates as well. Logan said, yes, we could do that. And then he scrambled to the airport and didn't reply to my text after that. So eventually at some point tomorrow in your podcast feed will be a Fresh Take Command episode all about Dan Quinn. Of course, tomorrow night we'll be talking about this ad nauseum at our 106.7 The Fan versus the Team 980 live event. Very excited for tomorrow's show. We will be live at the Bethesda Theater backstage. So I'd imagine later in the show, Ant will probably have, some of our colleagues, Kevin, whoever else, as they show up for the event. We'll pull them on set and have that tomorrow. So excited for that. So that's all tomorrow, of course, here on the Team 980, and I'll bring the camera and we'll do the YouTubes and everything tomorrow. So excited for all of that. Other than that, tomorrow, it's a Friday. Yates should be on. If not, he'll definitely be back with us next week in person. We are on Radio Row next week at the Super Bowl. Kevin Blackistone already booked. I'm trying to think who else. We had so many names in that spreadsheet, Anthony. There's so many possibilities.
Yeah, we got some. I don't know if they've been set in stone, but there are some possibilities.
Yeah, we got a couple NFL players. We got all kinds of dudes and dudettes ready to join us in Las Vegas. Right now, though, let's try to sneak in one or two more calls. Let's go to Gus in Arlington. Gus, thanks for calling. You are on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig, what do you think will constitute a successful first year for Quinn? For me, it'll be 2 divisional wins, top 16 defense, DVOA, and a top 16 running game. I think that's, feasible and to be expected for a veteran head coach like Quinn.
Yeah, I think those are all feasible. Thanks for the call. To me, it's about competitiveness. And it's funny because now we're in a place where the Commanders are mimicking the Wizards in a lot of ways, where I'm like, I don't know that it's going to always result in the scoreboard, but I want to see certain things in terms of style of play, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of growth and improvement that I think are very feasible for the Commanders and for Dan Quinn in year one. But I do think that, much like the Wizards, this roster might be stripped down to the studs. I think, to me, that's the biggest unknown. That's the biggest unknown overall moving forward for Quinn, for Peters, outside of who you take it to and what you do with that pick, is what do you actually have on this roster? I don't know. I truly, honest to God, don't feel like I have a good grip on the talent here, because it is a roster that was so poorly coached the last 4 years. Do they have some gems that haven't been polished yet? Whether it's Emmanuel Forbes, Jamin Davis, on down the list, Jahan Dotson, like what does the new OC do with him? There's a lot of questions to be answered over the next couple of months. All right, Ant, let's do it. Let's wrap up the show. If you missed any part of it, of course, all the football talk, check the Hoffman Show podcast. But let's end with some shenanigans, shall we? It is time for real things real people said into real microphones.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5-11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Even though I disappeared from the screen, Anthony, I could see your hand signals. I know what time to end the show, and I can see the second hand on my monitor, so I will end the show on time.
So if you get it wrong, is that a fine?
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's
Okay.
100% fair. It's a fine, but guess what? I'm not going to get it wrong. Apparently knocked my microphone loose. Yep. But I'm not going to get the out time wrong. George Kittle featured yesterday. George Kittle featured today. Remember that nasty pancake block he had on Aiden Hutchinson in the NFC Championship game? This is what it sounded like.
Watch George Kittle here. This against Aiden Hutchinson.
I don't know who was more excited, Kittle or you as a tight end.
That's a big-time matchup.
That's good timing. It screwed me. My proprioception. Your proprioception. That's a Michigan word. I'm an Iowa guy. You can't say stuff like that.
Kittle's hilarious, man. Also, I love that he's just like giggling as he drives Aiden Hutchinson into the ground. That's good stuff. I've mentioned this in trending today. The biggest story in the literal world of sports, Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes in Formula One for Ferrari. Flashback a couple weeks ago, actually a couple months ago at this point, Charles Leclerc was asked, hey, dude, you just signed a contract extension with Ferrari. What do you want in the future as a teammate?
There's been a bit of speculation in the media recently with regards to your future partner at Ferrari. What do you look for in a teammate?
Hello, Lewis.
Oh, hello, Lewis. Which is funny because he sounds British there, but Charles Leclerc, very French. Bonjour, Louis. I can't. Anthony, I'm trying to. This would be like. I mean, this is kind of like when LeBron joined the Lakers. That's the comparison. You have arguably the greatest ever in the sport joining the team with the most history in the sport. That is what Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari is.
That's scary then.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be Jordan coming to the Wizards.
No.
Okay, just making sure.
No. Amazing show today. You missed any of it on demand on YouTube and, of course, the Hoffman Show podcast. We'll see you tomorrow. And some of you will see in person tomorrow.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver.
Good stuff, Craig.